This series of the Make Life Work podcast is supported by Littlemore. They monitor your website for the boring things that people often forget until it's too late, so you can concentrate on making more. Plans start from £25 a month, but Make Life Work listeners get an exclusive 60-day free trial, plus all the referrals will be doubled, especially for the mental health charity Mind. Get your account today at littlewarden.com/makelifework. Welcome along to another episode of the Make Life Work podcast. I am Si Jobling, at Si on Twitter, and on this podcast I'm talking to people from around the tech scene about balancing work, life, well-being and side projects. This week I'm talking to Marc Littlemore, a software engineering team lead at the BBC, mostly based in Manchester. Marc has been on a really interesting journey with his tech career, very similar to myself, plus we share lots of outside interests in the likes of side projects, house music and even podcasts. He's also a family man with kids and tries to find a good balance with his health too. It made sense to invite Marc along as a guest for the Make Life Work podcast. Let's get into it. How's things going, Marc?
Hi, so really good, mate. Yeah, it's good to speak to you.
Indeed.
Yes, for people that don't know, we've known each other online for a long time, but we only met for the first time after 15 years last year, wasn't it?
It was about 15 years, scarily.
Yeah, something like 2005, something like that, wasn't it? So yeah, it's good to see you virtually.
In real life, IRL, as the kids say.
Yeah.
Yeah, we exchanged a few beers, didn't we, when our paths crossed last year?
Yeah, we need to do so soon as well.
We do. We need to recap, I think. But this is a nice little kind of interim option.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds good.
Cool. So let's get right back into the start. What got you into tech and how did you get started in it all?
So I'm instantly going to age myself, I think, with all of my answers there. So I guess I started getting into tech very young, so probably about 8 or 9. My friends had again, Binatone Pong machine where you used to play that tennis game Pong. So sort of got into the earliest video games as they were. And I remember going over to France when I was a kid. Mum and Dad took me and my brother over to France, and I played Space Invaders, and that was like one of the first video games. So that must have been sort of late 70s, early 80s. And when we came home, I badgered my mum and dad to get us an Atari VCS, which was one of the original Atari consoles. Again, played Space Invaders on that and Pac-Man probably. But there was a big key thing. Mum worked in data entry in the evenings, so she was good at sort of typing and stuff. And she suggested this thing for the Atari VCS, which was basic programming. And it was this strange. So for people that don't know, like the Atari VCS had like a standard sort of joystick, but it had this weird controller that where you could sort of write code for it. And I think you could only write something ridiculous like 9 lines of code. Atari VCS didn't have much memory, but it was like my first sort of, oh, this is interesting. I can get a computer to do something. So I think at that point, then I started badgering my mum. I sort of, we started reading in magazines about computers and things. And one of the earliest ones that was around at the time was the VIC-20, Commodore VIC-20. So I think we got one of those when I was about 10 or 11, which is sort of early 80s. And then my granddad also had a ZX81, which was one of the original sort of Sinclair computers. So back in the day, again, dating myself in the 80s, you used to be able to get those subscription magazines, and there was one called Input. And my granddad was very kind and used to buy it for me and my brother. And I used to just sit there each week typing in the programs from it. Because back in the day, I don't think kids realise it now. You turn on your tablet, you turn on your phone, you turn on your laptop. You're instantly on the internet and you've got a connection to sort of information. Back in the day, to turn on a computer, you generally had like a basic interpreter. And you had to code it yourself or load a game. So I spent my time sort of learning how to do that. And I think that's what really got me into sort of computing, back in the day. So my teenage years were just spent playing video games. We ended up with a Spectrum and a Commodore 64 as well. And I think Commodore 64 was probably where I sort of did a lot of my programming. It made little games. Me and my brother, I found the cassette actually called Space Mouse, which was a mouse you had to try and fly across some sort of asteroid field or something like that. He did the graphics. He's always been arty, and I did the programming for it. And then eventually, again back to 1990 now, then I went to Manchester, University of Manchester. So I'm originally from just a little place in Cheshire, just outside Manchester, probably about 40 minutes away. And I went up to University of Manchester to study computer science. So I did 3 years of that. I enjoyed that and enjoyed Manchester. That's when I started going clubbing and DJing and things like that a lot. And I guess sort of after university, tried to find a job, and I ended up working for a pharmaceutical company. So I wrote software for gas chromatography, which is essentially testing drugs and robot arms and things like that, and it was just boring. It sounds very glamorous when you start talking about robots, but it was literally making an arm just go left and right and up and down and then pulling some information out of that, so it wasn't exciting. So I really enjoyed games. I was really into gaming, and I wanted to get into that part of the industry. So I managed to get a job at a sort of quite a startup back in 1995, I think it was. And then I had a long career in games. So I spent about 18 years in the games industry. So Ocean and Infogrames, which were like big sort of 80s, sort of 90s games companies. I worked for Acclaim, who were another big one, and they went bust. And then ended up at Sony, I think, for most of the time. And I think there's a sort of key thing about the games industry. I sort of realised that, I don't know if you've got any friends, Si, in the games industry other than me, but the work-life balance there is just horrendous. And you still see it today, and it's a real shame that the sort of project management that happens around it sort of pushes the teams to work ridiculous hours. I mean, I know at one point I worked for probably around sort of 6 months where I was working. I tend to get in early, so 8:30, 9 o'clock till 10, 11 o'clock at night, and we were doing that for 6-7 days a week for 6 months. And it's just, you just watch relationships crumble, marriages crumble, things like that. It's just not sustainable. So eventually I just realised, as I started having children, I got married in 2006, and then I started having children, I just realised it just wasn't for me. So I sort of started moving out of the games industry. 2010, I did a little bit of contracting within the games industry, but it wasn't really set up for it like we know contracting within sort of most of the tech industry. And then eventually sort of moved over to the BBC in 2013, yeah. So that's a very long-winded how I got into tech there, wasn't it?
Well, long-winded, but you fit quite a lot in there, actually. Well, there's many things I want to pull out from that, but I think you've just kind of demonstrated the evolution of software as well. You've gone from the early days in the 80s where you had...
That's definitely dating me, isn't it? I sound like a dinosaur now.
No, but I was there as well, right? I was introduced to C64 myself. I think it was like late 80s more than mid or early, and a ZX81, a Sinclair ZX81, which had like 1K of RAM.
That's right.
You got a booster pack for 16K RAM. So my dad showed me how he built like a stock management program, and then we went into the Commodore and we started doing a bit more. We were playing the games, like you say, making our own games. And then it was through the 90s, like you say, you were in the midst of probably the highest peak of gaming, I guess. Because that was the revolutionary point of where it went into consoles, big name consoles. You mentioned Acclaim, Codemasters, and Sony, and all these. They were huge names at the time.
Yeah. I think I probably just missed out on the sort of late 80s, the 8-bit sort of era when Ocean was in its prime. I guess I moved to Ocean. It got bought by a French company, Infogrames, so it was sort of going downhill a little bit. But then that was the move to the first PlayStation, as it was called then, PlayStation 1, I think they refer to it now. Sort of the post Mega Drive up until the sort of the next generation of consoles. So yeah, for sure. It was a good time. And I had fun. I think the thing to sort of let people know is that the games industry is definitely fun. It's definitely creative. It's just there's a lot of hard work that goes into it. I think some people think, especially if you ever used to tell people you worked in games, everyone's like, oh, it's really exciting. You play games all day. And it's like, not quite. Someone still writes the code which reads the thing from the CD drive or the DVD drive or Blu-ray nowadays. There's all those really boring things that people still do. It's not all super exciting. So
no, I've heard the same. I've got a friend at work he used to work in games. I think he was at Microsoft. He was working on the Minecraft side of things as well.
Oh, cool.
So again, he said a lot of the same stuff. He's our sort of age range. He's got a family. It's very demanding, and it's very sort of waterfall driven from a software delivery perspective as well. You can't mess that up. I want to go back to, I think, like one of your first jobs. You were talking about working in pharmaceutical with robotics. So, like you say, it sounds, amazing. But you described it as, no, it was really dull and boring. But don't you feel like we're kind of going full circle now as we go into the newer era of tech where it's all about robotics and pharmaceuticals and all the real world uses of these things?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think it was just sort of a learning process for me because I came out of university, and while I was a developer as such, I think you realise once you actually start coding properly in a real world environment, it's very, very different than the sort of sanitized university environment that you get taught. You can just do these things, and then you realise there's, especially as me as a team lead now, there's a lot of pragmatic decisions you've got to make around what you actually do. You can't just pick up the fancy new code, and especially nowadays, in the sort of the JavaScript node world and stuff where there's loads of new things all the time, and everyone wants to pick them up. there's a lot of boring decisions and pragmatic decisions, and especially that the pharmaceutical company I worked for, they had their own proprietary language for like the robot arms. So it wasn't like I was gaining the experience of C, C++, sort of, you know, the languages of the time. I did a little bit, to be fair, I did a little bit of C there, but it was mostly I was writing in this sort of very similar to assembly language, sort of proprietary language that this pharmaceutical company had developed. And to be honest with you, I dropped chemistry. I was the first year of GCSE, so I dropped chemistry after. I did a GCSE in it, yeah, but I dropped it after that, so I didn't do it to A level. So I also had to understand the domain, and I think that's always really interesting when you get a new job. Part of it is, you know, learning software, how you write the software, but part of it is understanding the domain, what actually matters within that domain. And to be honest, I just had no interest in gas chromatography and sort of the science of it. It's like the old litmus paper where you put a litmus paper in some, you know, a liquid and work out how, you know, the different colours. It's essentially that, but with gases. So I think that was part of it, that I just wasn't as interested in that, just because it wasn't a sort of domain that I was interested in. And obviously, you know, as a sort of early 20-year-old, all I wanted to do was play video games. So that's why I moved across.
Makes sense. I think there's two elements to that. One, whatever you go into, make sure you enjoy it. You know, you don't want to do a job that you don't enjoy, because otherwise it just becomes tedious and actually a job rather than a career.
Yeah.
So fair play to you on that. And I want to go back to the domain thing in a moment. But the other thing is, you mentioned as well that you were young. You were trying to find yourself. You're in your 20s in Manchester, you know, during the height of all the music and the clubbing scene as well. I don't know how you managed to focus your energy on code. I could just be in music instead, you know. What a time, eh?
I guess that's quite interesting, because yeah, as we alluded to earlier, you and I sort of met through a sort of love of house music and sort of podcasts online at the time, sort of mid 2000s. But yeah, I started DJing back in '88, I think it was. I got sort of into music. Yeah. I was into hip hop as a kid. This little geeky white kid from a place called Frodsham in the middle of Cheshire, but we got into hip hop and sort of all the sort of 80s sort of hip hop, De La Souls, Tribe Called Quest, that sort of thing. So I knew that I was never going to be a rapper.
Go on a day in out to break some beats.
Yeah. And you know, back in the day, it's not like, you know, you just pick up a laptop in Ableton or you know, Fruity Loops or whatever and stuff like that, where you can just like make music easily. So I was never going to get into that production without buying a lot of equipment. So I convinced my mum and dad to allow me to get some turntables. So I got a pair of old Sound Lab belt-driven turntables and started DJing, and so I could do scratching and all that sort of stuff. And that's how I sort of got into it. But yeah, and then I moved to Manchester, and partially one of my reasons to go to University of Manchester was the Hacienda, which was the club of the time, where sort of acid house was sort of happening. And that, you know, that's why I went. And yeah, so I did quite a lot of DJing during that time. And I think I've always been, annoyingly, I weigh up risk very carefully. I've never been sort of someone who'll just go out on a limb and do things without really considering it. My wife always laughs at me for that, Claire. And you know, I'm just quite sensible. And I think I saw a lot of people trying to take I'm just going to DJ and I'm going to make my money through that. But I was always, well, you know, a career in tech is quite good. It pays reasonably well. And it's going to pay off my rent, or you know, when I bought a house, you know, it's going to pay the mortgage and stuff like that. So I did see a lot of people. I've got a friend from Germany. He's quite a famous, world famous DJ, and I just can't imagine getting to this age that I'm at now and wanting to go out every weekend. And you know, he's away. He's got family in Germany now, and you know, he's got a child, and I can't imagine being out all the weekends and stuff like that. So I think that the transition was probably a sensible one for me. Although at the time, I probably sort of kicked myself a little bit that I didn't push myself enough to. I did a lot of DJing, and I got relatively successful in Manchester and in Germany. I went over to Germany quite a lot, but I didn't necessarily push it. I didn't have that marketing sort of background to push myself even more, I guess. But yeah, good times.
You're very humble there, Mark. I like the way you say it.
Thanks.
I think you made a point about risk aversion as well, which obviously lend well to your current career as a team lead as well. So we'll revisit all the sort of the fun parts later on in the discussion. Let's go back to that transition then from game development to software development for BBC. What attracted you to working in a different remit, let's say, a different domain, as you mentioned earlier, and how did that go for you? Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So it's a little bit of a, I guess, a sort of side transition. So the BBC were looking, the BBC do a lot of game stuff. It tends to be in sort of the area of sort of children's. But they were looking for, I had a sort of colleague at one of the companies I worked for, which Sony bought a company, and sort of their management team ended up being our management team in Liverpool. And he was working at the BBC with his sort of remit was to try and do like a pan BBC sort of. BBC is a massive sort of enterprise company essentially, and he was trying to do this sort of pan BBC idea of being the central place to teach people across the business how to make games, because the BBC is essentially split up into the public sector and the private sector. But in terms of the public sector, there's two strands to it, with like editorial, who make all the sort of TV and the shows and stuff, and the news, things like that, and sport. And then the digital arm of it, and I was moving into the digital arm. And what he wanted to do was try and pull those two parts of the business together to help people to make games and have like a set of APIs that they could easily do high scores and sign in and things like that. So I moved over to more to do sort of games thing, and he wanted my experience in sort of understanding games technologies, working with outside vendors and things like that to help build games. So it was really sort of a slight sidestep initially, but I'd badly built out my sort of DJ website and stuff like that on WordPress and a bit of PHP, and I had been doing little bits and bobs of sort of web tech at the time, so it was sort of interesting to me. And I moved over and I started doing like Java, PHP, MySQL. Well, two of those which I had experience in, PHP and MySQL. And then we started doing like more functional languages like Scala. But ultimately, that whole thing, just trying to do something across the BBC, as I well know now, because I've been at the BBC for 6 years, it's much trickier. You need, and I'm sure you know this from your own role site, stakeholder buy-in, and when you've got many stakeholders, you've got many senior people, and you've got to get sort of digital people on board and editorial people on board. And it just didn't quite pan out as expected. So unfortunately, my boss there, he left, and then I got really ill, which I know we're going to probably loop back onto in a little bit. But I got really ill, and I wasn't actually in the office for about 5 months. And then when I came back, we'd started working. We were already just about starting to do this. We started working with a big program of work that was happening down in London, which was called My BBC, to do like the BBC authentication authorization systems. And at that point, and that's what I currently do, we started sort of learning about that. And when I came back from being ill, we started looking at like JavaScript and Node.js. And to be honest with you, I really hated JavaScript, despised it, because I come from typed languages. So when I started doing JavaScript, where everything could break really easily and you had no real types you could pass around anything, you could pass around a function, you could pass around an object, whatever. I just really despised it, and I don't think the tooling and things was there as it is now for me. But when I started moving over to Node.js, I was like, this is quite good, and the whole sort of package system of Node. And I think the best example for me is how it improved my own workflow. I used to do a lot of tooling within the games industry, and I'd sit down and I'd spin up a C module or a C++ module, and it might take me a week to write some tooling. And I found that like moving over to like Node.js, I can write that in probably about 2 hours now. Something that may have taken me a week, and it's just that it has moved over to being that I really love sort of Node and JavaScript. And I know it gets a really bad reputation, and I know you can hang yourself really easily with it. But I think as a sort of the ability to produce business value, which I think is ultimately, I've got my team lead's head on there, haven't I? But I think that's what we have to do. We're trying to build stuff for our audience, and the faster we can do it, the more we can iterate, the more we can get the data from that and understand whether it's the right thing. So I moved over to this sort of team. That's when I returned, which was about 2015, and then I was a principal engineer because I'd come to the BBC as quite a sort of senior engineer, and there's this sort of principal role that they've got. And then I moved over to being a team lead in about April 2017 because our team lead sort of left, and I sort of took over the mantle of doing that. But the transition into the tech I thought was really interesting, and it just got me into sort of web tech. And then the great thing about going to a big enterprise company, especially the BBC, is the thing we do is at scale, and that's a massive it's a massive new challenge which opens up for you when you start having to understand it. And I'm sure you from ASOS and things, I'm sure you understand this, that people don't seem to understand that there's quite a leap in terms of what you have to deal with on we don't deal with Black Friday, but our Black Friday is strictly come dancing voting. So you have to sign in through our systems. We don't run the vote system, but you have to sign in to have the ability to vote. And on a Saturday night, our traffic goes through the roof in 30 seconds. And how do we put infrastructure in place to ensure that things don't crumble? And I'm sure for ASOS, it's things like Black Friday or Christmas and things like that, isn't it? Where it's those sort of technical challenges which aren't how you show things to the user. It's how you stop the whole world from crumbling and the business from losing X million or whatever. It's those sort of things which I found really fascinating at scale. So, yeah.
Nice. Wow, there's loads of things in there that as well that we could probably pull out. We'll be here all day though.
I was going to say we might be all afternoon, mightn't we?
Yeah, just to reiterate what you were saying, really, I guess I was the same. I was an engineer for 10, 15 years nearly, and then I was more attracted to the idea of one, what's the customer and business value in what we're doing, focus on that faster feedback, getting something to market soon, but at good quality, and then the resiliency of doing things at a huge scale as well. So I feel like we've kind of gone down that similar journey. It's more like now I know how to do it at a normal level. How do I get others to do it, and how do we make sure that works across the board as well? So it sounds like you're attracted to
Mm.
similar challenges as I have been as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the transition to sort of a team lead is an interesting one as well.
Yeah.
That sort of how you sort of view yourself and how you build up a team to do the things and how, empower the teams, I guess. And I think that comes with sort of age, experience, and sort of moving across from, as a developer, you know what you're delivering. So you essentially you sit down and you have this sort of piece of work that you have to deliver, and the value is there once it's on live. That's it. You've got in our speak, and I don't know if people listening sort of know the way a lot of software works, but like we do sort of agile, and you have tickets on a board, and that ticket represents the value that you're going to give to the user or the business. Once that's in live, you've delivered that. And as a developer, you can high five, you've got this workout. I think as a team lead and as sort of a manager and leader, that value is really hard to unpick. And I guess that's why I struggled with initially when I moved over to being a team lead. Is like, how do you understand what value you've provided? And it's so much less tangible as a sort of team lead, and because you're the same, aren't you?
Similar, yeah. And I feel like
Yeah,
I've been through that sort of journey probably a lot more a few years ago. I wanted to
yeah.
write the code and be the man that kind of pushed the button to go put it out to the world. But actually, I started to realise, is this my strength, are other people better than me at this? And I think that was
Yeah.
the transition period for me, is going, actually, I'm better off trying to support people to do this in a better way, in a quicker way, or whatever it might be,
Mm.
but also learn from that and share it out. But like you say, monitoring and not monitoring, but getting those metrics and the value of doing that as a lead, it's a lot harder to record and observe on. There are the techniques you can do in agile
Yeah,
ways of
yeah,
working, which again,
yeah.
some of these listeners probably won't be interested in.
I talked to writing a list. So
No, it's just I feel like you can get some metrics like, okay, how many bugs have we introduced over the last month? So we know quality is good. How many items have we delivered over the last month as well? Is it been up or down based on previous months? Why as well? Is it because it was more complicated? Was it just because there was technical challenges? So they're the metrics I'm watching for myself now and see the improvement. And funnily enough, recently I've been doing like a review for the team that I work with. And for the last 3 months, I've been doing like a quick report, go snapshot. This is what we've delivered. This is what we've kind of had to do from an ops perspective. This is the impact on our tech and our customers. And look at the improvements we've made over just 3 months. I could take great satisfaction of highlighting this to the team and going, look what you guys have made. And they're like, oh,
mm,
we wouldn't have done that if it wasn't for you. I went, no, you would have done it better probably, but I'm helping you uncover these
yeah,
things. That's the joy I get from what I do now, is sort of seeing the team recognise they're good, they built good stuff, and I can help them shape that going forward.
yeah,
Do you feel the same though when you're working with your guys?
yeah. Definitely, yeah. And I sort of I basically decided that I was going to write down what I did. I had someone new join our team, who as one of our senior engineers, and there's a technical architect who used to work at the BBC who he knew reasonably well, who used to write down, like, since he started at the BBC in like 2014, 15 or something, he wrote down exactly what he did each week. And I thought it was really interesting. I'd never done that before. And I started doing it because I would get to the end of the week and I would have done a lot of things, especially like as a sub team lead. And your leadership role is to have a lot of one-to-ones to unblock your team. And once your team starts getting big, my team's 8. I've got one open role, so it'd be like 9 people, and I have a few other, different, like, managing up type meetings and one-to-ones and things like that. You get to the end of the week and you think, what have I done? But I write down everything that I do each week now, because I realise that I unblock a lot. I unblock the team a lot, and I add value by doing that. But I also, the things that you look at as a sort of team leader, they're probably more long term, and it's that. It sounds a bit, managementy, but it's like the strategic things that you go, well, I've had a conversation with X, Y, and Z across the business, which in 6 months will come to fruition when we can do that work. but it doesn't necessarily add tangible value right now. But you've had those conversations, and all of a sudden my team are talking to your team, and we can do the work together. And I'm part of a platform, so a lot of stuff we do is to enable other teams, product teams at the BBC. So if I can have these big sort of wide-reaching conversations, then that's sort of where I should see my value. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know where you're coming from. I was talking to, because I basically, as I'm leaving ASOS very soon, we've got a new replacement. I was talking about the handover stuff. I was like, what is our role? The job title I've got is Agile Delivery Manager, but what does that actually mean? And I was going through all this sort of stuff, and it reminded me, I actually created a manager README about 2 years ago. Put it on GitHub, I put it out there because it's pretty open stuff. But it does make you realise, what am I here to do? I'm a servant leader for you guys. I'm an unblocker. I like to make the silly analogy. I'm a Super Mario. Just give me a plunger and I'll unblock the problems. But yeah, it's interesting how you shift your sort of requirements, your purpose, I guess, and how you facilitate those changes over time as well.
I think the big thing you've got to realise is the managing up as well. So you've got to set expectations, and like I think that the people don't realise it. And there's that difference between management and leadership, isn't there, as well? So I used to manage people. I did a lot of graduate recruitment at Sony in the sort of late 2000s, and I'm sure if anyone who I recruited is listening to this, I've still got friends who I recruited. I don't think I was a particularly good manager at that point. I was very technical, and I wasn't very good at doing the sort of people part of it as well as I am now, because I don't think my mindset was right then. I think now my mindset is like, right, that I unblock and help the team and protect the team, and also manage that sort of stakeholder expectation up that you have to do. You have to talk to senior people and you have to understand their needs, and it's that sort of balance of sort of leadership both ways, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, too right. I agree with you, because I think I was about 29 when I started managing one. It was only one person, but it was still management. I went on a course about good management, and I was like, yeah, if I have to go on a course, I probably shouldn't be here doing this. But yeah, it was the two-way conversations. I think I was more focused on managing up than down at that time.
Yeah.
Selfishly, because I was all about my personal, improvement. But as I've got older, more mature, and learning from all my experiences, I'm realising actually managing down is the harder part.
Yeah.
But the most valuable part, managing up, is actually quite straightforward if you know the right way to communicate and who to speak to about it. Like, say, managing expectations. Yeah, I think we could go on and on about this, and I'm mindful that our time is flying by. So you alluded to something earlier, and we're going to talk a bit about your health. You had a really scary story in 2014 that really threw you out, and you said you're like 5 months out of work. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that and, how you got through it all?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It was a bit of an unexpected turn back in June 2014. So just out of the blue, it's actually right at the start of that sort of programme of work that I mentioned at the BBC. So we were sort of transitioning. I went down to London and came back. It was a Wednesday. I remember it really vividly. And on the Thursday, I felt a bit ill. It was like a stomach bug, sickness and diarrhoea. That's sort of classic stomach bug that you... So I went home, and it just got progressively worse over that weekend. So that was a Thursday. I was meant to go into a school to give like a sort of workshop with my boss at the time, and I felt really awful, and I had to just send him a message just saying, like, I'm really throwing up. I can't get out of bed. I can't come. And then that whole weekend, it just got progressively worse. And normally a stomach bug's like 24 hours, 48 at worst, but I couldn't keep anything down. And to be honest with you, my memory got really hazy at that point, and I got really confused. And my wife had taken me to see the doctor on the Friday because she was concerned, and then again on the Monday, and he basically said, look, there's something not right here, and he felt my stomach, and apparently I was really in pain, and I don't really remember this. I essentially got rushed to hospital. I went into A&E, and they just took me in overnight, and they just said, I'll give him fluids, it'll be okay, don't worry. And Claire saw me on this was the Monday, and she saw me on the Tuesday, and then again they said, oh, he's recovering, don't worry. And then at about 2:00 on the Wednesday morning, they rang her and essentially said, you better come into the hospital. We think he's going to die. And it turns out that I had like a streptococcal infection, Streptococcus group A, in the bowels. They gave me a big CT scan and saw there was something wrong in my bowel. But by that point, and it's people talk about it all the time now, which is great. But at the time, nobody talked about it. And I actually had sepsis, which is when the body starts essentially attacking itself. There's an infection there. And it's caused by like any infection, but the body essentially goes, do you know what? I'm going to protect myself. But unfortunately, that means you get multiple organ failure. So all of my organs pretty much started shutting down. So, and they stuck me in ICU, in an intensive care unit. They ventilated me, put me into an induced coma for about 7 days. And it was pretty much touch and go. They essentially told Claire, my wife, that I was going to die and I was unlikely to survive the night. So sort of scary stuff for her, especially, and the family. The kids were 7 and 4 at the time. So yeah, so I ended up. I mean, thankfully I came through it, but it's not without an awful lot of issues. So yeah, I was in sort of intensive care for about 45 days, and at that point I was on a ventilator, so I had to. Odd things that you never think you're going to say, but I had to learn to breathe again. I had to learn to eat again because I was being fed by a nasal tube. I had what's called a stoma, so essentially they cut part of my bowel out and they brought the tube from the lower intestines out of my body. Most people have heard of a colostomy, but this is on the other side of the body, so it's where your ileum is, and it's called an ileostomy. And I had that for about 11 months in the end, but by giving me a lot of drugs to keep me alive, they didn't have enough blood going to my feet because they had to keep all the blood around your organs with the various drugs they give you. So I ended up having partial amputation of my right foot because I got necrotic tissue, which is like when explorers go to the North-South Pole and they get frostbite and their ends of the feet and fingers drop off essentially because they die. So they had to cut like the end of my right toe off, and I've got no feeling in my feet anymore. So I moved down after 45 days, moved onto a proper ward, and then they had to. I could barely move at that point because all the muscle wastage and stuff, and it's loads of things you just don't even think about. You wouldn't even think that you'd need to think about. So it took me about another month and a half to get out of hospital when they decided I was well enough. But I had to learn to walk again. So I came out of hospital with a Zimmer frame, which I know I'm old, but it's an odd thing to have a Zimmer frame. Yeah. So I was about 42 at the time. Yeah. So and then I had the stoma reversed eventually, but it's probably it took around 2 years for me to get to the point of normal. And I say normal with inverted commas there because Claire and I always say we set the new normal, because there were a lot of things that I thought I'd be able to do. I'd just get back to normal, and I genuinely can't. I'm still alive. I have to look at it because I'm super positive, but I look at it as I'm still alive. Which is the good thing. It's just, you're constantly dealing with, I get a lot of issues with my feet still because I've sort of got like a diabetic's feet, although I'm not diabetic. So you can't feel them. So you have to be really careful about like stones in your shoes because they cause ulcers, like holes in you, and you get infections. And it's just a sort of knock on thing. But yeah, pretty much threw me for a good period of time there. But something to talk about, isn't it?
Great anecdote for a podcast.
Yeah.
No, I mean, all jokes aside, you went through some serious difficult times through that point. Like you say, you're early 40s, you got a young family, you got a pretty intense job. It's not like a plodding along sort of mundane job. But I guess in a lucky way, you're in a big environment, a big company that had the capacity to support you as well through that.
Yeah, for sure.
So, like you say, trying to look at the positives, it could have been a lot worse. I'm really impressed with how you've come about all this. You've still been very positive. The family have adjusted. You've adjusted. You found a way to get around a lot of these challenges. And as you say, you found your new norm, haven't you?
That's what I'm to say. I mean, the thing is, I think you realise, obviously, it can't not make you readdress life. So in intensive care at Warrington Hospital, they give you a diary. They write a diary, essentially sort of documenting what's happened to you, because if you are well enough to come out of intensive care, and many people aren't, then it's a confusing time. It definitely was a confusing time for me because I was massively under sedation and sort of heavy drugs. So to understand what's happened to you is quite difficult. It's very, very confusing. So you read this sort of diary when you're ready to. But to read the second night where they say, we've told your wife, although we've given you all the drugs we can, you're unlikely to survive the night. You can't not think about that. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I don't constantly think I'm going to die, but at the same time...
You had a warning, didn't you?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it makes you sort of readdress everything. So we've tried to go with like the new normal, as I sort of said to you. But we also, like, I can't remember where I read it, but it's like, don't sweat the small things. That's what we try and live by. And it's really difficult, don't get me wrong. It's, it's when the idiot cuts you up on the motorway or whatever, and you get really frustrated by it. And it's trying to say, yeah, but I'm still alive. And it's trying to position it like that. Yeah, that person is doing whatever they're doing and they might have had a really rubbish day and that's why they're racing to get home or whatever. And they've just cut me up and they didn't mean to and they didn't see me. And it's hard. Don't get me wrong, it is really hard. But I try and go, like, take a step back. Let's try not to get too annoyed by it. And I guess that's why I'm sort of as positive as I am, because we now try and build everything around our lives and sort of, you know, the work-life balance, which, you know, is what your podcast's about. It's like, how do we ensure that, you know, yourself, our kids are growing up, my kids are now sort of 12 and 10, and they won't be here for much longer in terms of like they'll go off to university and do whatever they're going to do. And it's sort of trying to make sure that your family life and your sort of relationships and with people as a whole are right now in the present, as it were.
Yeah.
So
it's good actually. That you mentioned stuff about the diary earlier, just then about, you know, recording everything. We'll talk about that in a moment, because I know it's part of your recent retro that you've started doing this. But while we're on the topic of family and sort of, you know, for finding that balance, how do you get to spend time with them? And what do you do for fun with them as well? What do you get up to while you're with your family?
Yeah, well, so our family, so my wife works 2 days a week. She's a teacher, but she also does a lot of tutoring in the evenings as well, sort of supplement that. She, you know, we took as a family. Well, she'd already done part time when she had our first child. But we sort of took stock of, like, she was commuting over to Manchester, and we lived just on the outskirts of Warrington, so roughly between Manchester and Liverpool, for people who don't know where it is. And we sort of took stock on like what she wanted to do, so she sort of reduced her hours a bit and down to 2 days, so we could like spend more time in the family. So yeah, I mean, during the week, I mean, you know what it's like yourself. There's always homework and things like that to do, but you know, we enjoy playing sort of games and with the kids. The kids are quite into sort of video games and things like that. Trying to get them off YouTube is usually the thing, as I'm sure you know yourself.
Oh yeah.
And then, to be honest with you, the family. So my wife Claire was really into sort of musical theatre and drama when I met her, and yeah, so theatre's a big thing in our lives, and the kids love theatre. They do a lot of drama at the weekends and stuff like that. So to be honest, there's lots of going out and seeing shows when we can, and they're in a lot of things. And then I've just been trying to make sure that, especially for my own health, that I try and do more exercise, because I think I got guilty of not wallowing in my own self-pity, as it were, but like being really sort of very, very ill. It's very hard to get back into a process of like doing regular exercise when you have to be really wary about the exercise that you do. Like, just before I got ill, I had one of those 40-year-old midlife crises type thing, and said, do you know what, I should get fit. And I was training for the Warrington half marathon. So I was running about sort of 7 miles, you know, for my runs, I could run about 7 miles, and I was really chuffed with that. But then now I can't really do any running because it's so high impact on my feet, and I'm trying to sort of readdress my sort of health there. So just trying to get out with the kids at the weekend, and we've tried to do a lot more walking, especially this year. We're trying to get out every weekend to make sure we live right on the countryside, sort of just on the edge of Warrington, so almost sort of countryside of Cheshire. So within like 20 minutes we can be out in a field or up a hill or something like that. So just trying to do a bit more like that. And I think as the kids are getting older, they're starting to get to the point where they want to create a bit more, and I'm trying to encourage that, while still keeping some sort of privacy. You know, it's that hard balance, isn't it? You know, all the kids nowadays want to be YouTubers, but I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the kids being on YouTube, even though I've done a few myself. But like, it's that hard sort of balance, isn't it? So I'm trying to make sure that while they consume YouTube, that they create as well. And I've always been like, all my side projects are always, do a bit on the side, music, programming, whatever. It's trying to get that sort of balance, isn't it, with them?
It is, yeah, and yeah, there's many elements to that we share, I think. So, like, you got 2 kids, they are addicted to YouTube, so getting them off their screens and into the real world at the weekends is crucial. And anything we can do to even just say, come on, we're going out for breakfast on a Saturday morning, just to get some quality time with them. So it sounds like you kind of get in there, right? It's not easy, but that's one element. I'm like you. I'm trying to encourage them to make things if they're on computer time, like we did as a kid. I feel like if you're making, you're learning or enjoying, but it's not just wasteful, mindless gaming or YouTube views or Netflix or whatever it is. But it's not easy to get our kids off these devices. We say as we're both looking at screens, talking to each other, when we should be in the real world. It's
true, and it is tricky, isn't it? Because like my side projects, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in a minute, but you know, I tend to do a lot of stuff on a computer, so I'm just as guilty of sitting in front of a computer or electronic device as they are. And one thing that I tried to do it last year especially, and this year, is I track a lot of things. I've got a little Google spreadsheet where I do my habit tracking, and one thing I just wanted to do was read, because I used to love reading, but I look back at my past few years and I'm like, you read like one book in 2015 or whatever it was. And so I just made sort of a little, I don't really do New Year's resolutions, but I set sort of longer term goals, I guess. And one of them was just, can you read 10 books in a year? And I did. I managed to read 10 books. And I was quite chuffed with it. And so this year I'm saying, can I read 20 books this year? And I'm just on my third now, and we're not at the end of January, so it's not bad going. So, but it just means that I've purposely tried to shut off at a reasonable time and say, put your electronics away, rather than scrolling mindlessly through Twitter as I am wont to do. Just why don't you actually pick up the book and read a few chapters of that? And yeah, I think it's good to get that balance, isn't it, between sort of electronic and the real old world, as it were.
Yeah, I've been doing exactly the same again. God, we're copying everything. I was New Year, I was like, I need to read more. I realised, like you, I only read about 4 or 5 books last year. But I'm on the train for 50 minutes each way to London every day. So it's like, I could commit to just reading for 20 odd minutes or a chapter every journey. And I've even set up a reminder in my task app to go, time for reading yet? I'm like, yes, it is. Thanks for that. Yeah. And the screen down, book open, and enjoy. But it is so easily distraction, because when you get that push notification in Twitter or Tweetbot or whatever it is, you're like, oh, what's that? No, don't look. And I tell you what, Apple Watches are even worse for this, because you just get like a tap on your wrist going, by the way, it's like Clippy in the office. It's like, by the way, did you want to do this? Did you want to look at this? Shut up, leave me alone, I want to read. So yeah, I know what you mean, but I feel like we need to encourage this with everyone around us nowadays, to just remind there's an amazing world around us, and tech doesn't necessarily comply with this, so turn it off. Yeah, you talked about your tracker there, actually. It's something that caught my attention in your annual review from last year. So did you say you just used like a Google Sheet to record this stuff?
Yeah, it was just, I don't know why I started doing it. I must have read a blog post or something like that. And it was more that, it's a quantified self thing where if you don't know what you do, then like to track it is to understand it, I guess. So yeah, so I track my exercise. So I did like a single whether I did exercise. I wanted to get better at writing, reading, early night. I tracked units of alcohol just to see how much I was drinking, side projects, and then, I think that was it last year.
So about 6 or 7 things then.
Yeah. And it was just more like what do I want to achieve, and what do I actually care about? And like, to mention, like things like the alcohol thing, I don't actually drink that much. As I've got, I guess when I was ill a bit, I didn't drink for at least a year when I was ill, post illness, and then it's just like, it's not a thing that I often do. I do. I mean, I do have a beer every now and again. I had a glass of wine the other night, but it's just like I just wanted to see how much I was actually drinking. And to be honest, what I should probably track is like mood and stuff like that against it, because I do find that to drink means the next day I'm often tired, and then it's like, there's the correlation of those sort of things. And I genuinely wanted to see if by writing it down. Oh, do you know what it was? I think it was. Have you ever heard the thing about The Streak? It's a guy who does Seinfeld.
Oh yeah. So
basically, his idea about comedy was to write a new comedic routine, joke, whatever, every day, and it was to not break that streak. So you've got to be doing it for as many days as you can. And I think there are lots of apps that you can do this. And essentially, part of it was that, like, if I write down the fact I'm going to exercise, will I continue to exercise for a period of time? And to be honest, it did work for periods of time. In certain times, exercise, I can just see here from last year, I did 25% of the year was exercise. So that's pretty rubbish.
I don't know. That's quite good for a lot of people nowadays.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess it's better than I used to, but it's just like trying to track it, and like, if I can track it more, then hopefully I'll do something about it by thinking, do you know what, you don't do much here.
No, I'm a bit of a data junkie myself. I like to record things like health, like my exercise, food at the moment, because I'm trying to understand my dietary demands. But then, like I say, the reading thing, it's built into the app TickTick that I use for all my task management. And they've built in this new feature called Habits, and you can set your own habits. There's some recommendations like reading and exercise. But to me, as I say to a lot of people, unless you're observing your tracking, what's the point? You don't do it for the satisfaction. Do it to actually learn your habits. And that's the bit I'm missing at the moment. That's why I'm curious how you're doing it. So it sounds like a Google Sheet you'll have to share with me at some point, or anonymize, do a blank template, and then we maybe put it in the show notes for other people to have a play with.
Yeah, you can share it. Yeah, probably people don't want to see what I'm doing every day, but yeah, I definitely share the sheet. It's nothing exciting. It's literally a Google Sheet with like a few columns in it, and then a few formulas which just do number of days in the year, work out a percentage of what you've done against the number of days that have gone past already. It's just that it's quite boring, but
you say it's boring. It sounds quite interesting, to be fair. This is what we're on the planet to do. So I'd like to know what the hell I am doing with it.
But yeah, I guess it did definitely make me do some streaks, and And the sort of 10 books is just was a personal goal last year. And to be honest with you, I was in December at like 9 books, and I was like, I need to read one more book. And it was like I felt like a dread that I wasn't going to hit this 10 books. So it did. I think it did help.
What'd you do? Just grab like a little Ladybird's kids book and just go,
yeah, one of the
yep,
kids
I'm
books,
done.
Yeah.
20 minutes, boom.
No, I ended up getting a Kindle book and then just sort of devouring that. And especially over Christmas when you've got a bit of downtime because you're not in work as much and stuff like that. So I managed to do it in the end, which is
good. Sounds like you're getting a better balance anyway, especially after your 2014 moment, life crisis. Right, we've done health, we've done work. Let's talk, which we've already talked a little bit about, side projects and some of the things that you get a real kick from, not just work and health and stuff, but actually, what is it that you've been doing up to lately? Let's rewind a little bit. 2005, me and you, we both went out into the podcast world with our own music podcasts.
Yeah.
What attracted you to doing that, and where did it take you?
Yeah, podcasting was an interesting one. So as I sort of alluded to earlier, I had DJ'd and I was a relatively successful DJ in Germany, at least. I had a friend who at university, he did a German degree, so he was out there for a year, and I used to send him cassette tapes, the old mixtapes. And so in the sort of 2000s, I realised that I could sort of use my technology knowledge to try and help build something. Honestly, I started podcasting because I found out about it, and I started listening to a few podcasts, and I thought I could use this as a way to get my music out there and my mixes and get myself some more DJ gigs. And ultimately, it never really happened in that way. I did get a few offers, but it was all, it just never came to fruition, really. But yeah, so I did that podcasting around the same time, you and I met, up until about 2011. And I think having kids and just having less time, just for me at least, just stopped me from doing it. And I'd started to slow down on the DJing also at that time anyway, just sort of natural progression of getting married, having kids, in all honesty, probably not wanting to go out till like 6 o'clock every night and what have you. But yeah, then I guess around the sort of 2009, 2010, I was probably also looking for what sort of side projects can I do to potentially make some money on the side as well. I guess it's, you start reading about the successful side projects that people have. And while in all honesty, I don't think I've necessarily had one yet, I did quite a bit. I mean, I definitely did some stuff around sort of affiliate marketing and sort of Google AdWords at the time, a little bit of marketing and advertising in early sort of 2010-ish. And I made probably about 11 or 12 grand from that. But that's over like 3 or 4 years. If you don't know about Google AdWords, in the financial space as well, I don't advise that for the faint-hearted. You're talking like £5 or £6 a click. And it was pretty hairy, but I did that for a little bit. And then I guess it's the transition from games into more web tech. My side projects have tended to be sort of scratch my own itch, I guess. It tends to be a technology I think I'm interested in or want to learn more about, so I'll build something around that. And what was really interesting, one of my goals for this year is to write more, so I wrote that 2019 retrospective on my website, which was taking the stuff I got from my habit tracker, looking on GitHub and like where I'd done code, because I don't really code during the day either, from a day job anymore, so it's things on the side. And I realised I'd done an awful lot in the past year. A big thing that I sort of got into about 2017 was sort of messenger chatbots, and I genuinely can't remember why I started reading about them, and it's just like I like automation anyway, the idea that we have the ability to set up a few things that can talk to each other and ping something over here and do that and can automate the process. I think it's really powerful, and there's a big thing around no code movement, isn't there, at the moment for people that aren't coders being able to do that. I got into that, and then I found a platform called ChatFuel, which is like a chatbot platform for Messenger, and I just joined their Facebook group, and I became sort of a bit of an expert, and people were struggling with this. They have this idea of this JSON API, so JSON's a data format for people that don't know, and I was just like, well, people don't understand it. I'll just make a YouTube video. So I made these like simple YouTube videos explaining, and then people love that. And I love helping people. And I think that's probably shows in like my team lead role, hopefully, that I enjoy helping the team and I enjoy teaching people. We've got some less experienced people on the team, so I enjoy mentoring and things like that. So it's just that sort of thing that I got into. And then I did a little bit of consultancy around that, although if you read my 2019 retrospective, it didn't go quite as well. A few invoices not been paid and things like that. And some people who wanted an awful lot but didn't offer much in return. Like that was mainly 2018, but it's just a bit frustrating because hopefully I haven't burnt any business bridges, but to do work for people to not be paid for it is just frustrating. So
I've been there myself before. Yeah, I think I built some web projects back in the noughties on the side. And I spent a lot of time. I think we even cancelled a bank holiday weekend so I could actually focus on the project. Got it all done, quite happy with it. I worked with a friend as well, so it was two of us working on this. Sent it over and they were like, don't like it. I'm not going to pay you. I was like, excuse me. But this was a guy who got a lot of sort of authority, a lot of kind of, he played the business game quite well, let's say. And I'm more of a softie. I'm harder to kind of push it as I should. But I learned from that. I was like, right, I'm never ever going to cancel a bloody bank holiday again for these things. I'm going to make sure that I've got good terms in place if I ever do one in the future. But quite frankly, I think that was the last paid project I took on. And I felt like you, I wanted to chase things that I enjoy. It's my time and I want to learn new things. So I'm not going to try and monetize from these things. I just want to try and enjoy it, give back to the community, teach people if I can, learn myself, but really sort of take a reality check is why am I doing this?
Yeah.
You know, and it feels like you've been through that a few times in different ways, like with the podcasting, with the affiliate marketing, and then the bots as well. So what's the plan with these courses as well now with all the training around bots?
Yeah, so I wrote a little ebook last year, which to be honest with you took me far too long, and I probably made it too long as well. It's about 30 pages. Tried to make it pretty, and pro tip: don't use Canva to do ebooks. While they look very pretty, they're it's a sort of basic design software, and it's good for making pretty pictures and Instagram images or whatever, but it's less good.
Great for quick wins like that, yeah, but rubbish for big proper things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, and it's a brilliant tool, don't get me wrong, but it's just I was trying to find a nice way to write an ebook which allowed you to write and make it look pretty, because I just think that, and perhaps this is wrong on my part, and this is where I'm probably not very good, which is like my marketing and networking type for myself, is I always felt like it had to be like an attractive looking digital product, whereas sometimes you get like those free downloads or PDFs from people, and they are literally Google Docs that have just been exported to a PDF. And I didn't want that. I wanted to spend a bit more time on it. But I genuinely spent probably about 3 months, which should have been a week-long project, I'm sure, which is a bit frustrating. So, yeah, this year I'm just trying to work out what to do. And I think I work with my wife quite closely, and we can perhaps very briefly touch on what she does. But just I'm looking at sort of another digital product, but actually getting something out there and seeing that people will pay for it. Because I think I do an awful lot of things that I spend a lot of time on, and I think they help me personally, but it would be good to have this little sort of side project and make a little bit of extra income, or, a lot of income, from sort of a course or a digital product or, ebook type thing. I think something like that is what my aim is for at least the first sort of quarter of this year.
I like the fact that you set yourself like a short-term goal, even to just sort of understand what it is going to be, and then you can kind of go, right, I've got a year to do that now. Yeah, that's probably doable.
I think it's really easy to fall into that though, isn't it? And I am definitely my biggest failure. I think is the shiny. Look at that exciting thing over there. And I think everyone does this who does a lot of side projects. They start something, and I'm sure your GitHub's the same. It's just full of broken projects that you once thought were a brilliant idea that you've not touched again for like 3 years. And it's just about I think you need to focus on something, but get that validation up front. I've realized more and more that I'm not very good at understanding what the market wants. I guess probably because I'm more of a technology background than a marketing background. And it's just about, you see people who do well, and it's just that they've validated first. And I think that's my aim, is to just understand what I'm going to build and then build it and time box it to a short period of time. And then I can throw it away if it's not worked, it's only made a little bit of money, that's fine, but I'll find that. That's the plan.
Indeed. And I think that's what the On The Side community is really all about as well. It's taking those people and those little projects that kind of either blocked or stumbled or lost traction, try and get them finished and get something into market and help each other do that with a bit of motivation as well. Some people are better than others in that community. Dom Hodgson, who's in there, we've talked to him on this show before as well. He's very good at just going, right, this is what the market needs and this is what I want to build and I'm doing it and I've got it done, and then he'll talk about it a bit more. But it's very hard. I'm not saying it's easy. Like you say, it comes with our maturity, I guess, as well in what we do as our jobs. Yeah. You mentioned the work you do with your wife as well and her side projects. It's a series of young adult fiction books. So can you tell us about that and how you find working with your partner on something, which is something I'm kind of working out myself as well?
Yeah, it turns out it's great, and I think naively when I was younger, I didn't think. My mum and dad unfortunately split up when I was younger, and my dad since died. And it's a long story, but I think I wasn't convinced that like being in a partnership with someone was like amazing, and then I got married, and it was just the most amazing thing ever. And anyone who doesn't think they want to get married, it's actually quite a good thing. So I'm super supportive. My wife says she is incredibly motivated. And she's basically similar to your wife's side, that she's a teacher, she's an English teacher, and has been for quite a long time now. But we started discussing, I guess, a side project type thing, and I had the wherewithal to do the technology parts of things for her. And I said, well, why don't you self-publish some things? She wanted to be a writer, and I bought her Teach Yourself How to Be a Writer type, author type book. And then she was like, oh, that's a good idea. And I was like, we could just push it out. And she wrote, in 2012, she wrote 3 or 4, I think, GCSE study guides. And they were, because she had knowledge of the syllabus and stuff, like Of Mice and Men was on there, a play called DNA by Dennis Kelly. And she wrote these 2 guides, and they made us some money, and we were like, oh, you can make money out of sort of publishing, self-publishing. And then we went on holiday in 2013 and to Menorca, and she said, I've got this idea for this short story about sort of a thriller in Menorca. And I was like, all right, write it. And she did all right out of it. And like, all right is like, a few £100 versus, we all wish that we were J.K. Rowling and millions and what have you, but...
J.K. Rowling in it.
Yeah, exactly. But then she started sort of looking into like what she could do. She wrote a sequel to that. They were both like novellas, so they were about sort of 40,000 words, so sort of smaller books. But it was just like trying to learn about Amazon and how you sold things, because the Kindle opened up this sort of digital market which didn't exist for self-publishers. And then she started writing some of these dystopian young adults, so sort of things like Hunger Games, The Maze Runner type that. And she got this series called Flow. And she's just released, last week, her 4th book and final book in the series. So since 2017, she's been writing sort of a book a year. So I sort of worked with her quite closely in the early days. I did some covers from some of the early stuff, the GCSE guides and stuff, but I'm no graphic designer, and Canva didn't exist at the time, so I was doing sort of Photoshop or Pixelmator I use on the Mac, to do these sort of mock-ups. But there's a real art, literally an art to it, to getting the right cover that matches the right style for the right sort of books. If you stand out, people don't necessarily think it's a thriller or a young adult dystopian or whatever. So there's a real sort of art to getting the right style which matches the book so that people will buy it. And that's the big thing that we've got at the moment, is just trying to learn about marketing. So learning an awful lot about Amazon adverts and Facebook marketing and Facebook adverts and things like that. So we do a lot of that together, because I've done some of the Google AdWords in the past, so I understand some of the concepts perhaps better than she does at the moment. But she understands it from a book point of view and from an author point of view. And it's moral support more than anything. I think in a relationship, to support each other is fantastic. And I've not really mentioned it much here, but I gave a big push at the BBC for sort of remote working, because when I was ill, I had to. I literally couldn't come into the office. I was going to hospital a lot. And I've become a little bit of a poster boy at the BBC for sort of remote working. So I've been pushing a lot. I go and talk to quite sort of senior leaders about how we should be supporting it, which is great. But one thing we often do, and I'm working from home today, is we work remotely, but we both work in the house together in separate rooms, and that actually works. And we had some work done in one of our bathrooms, just had a new bathroom, and one of the plumbers was like, you actually do work when you're in the house? I'm like, well, yeah. And he seemed quite surprised that you could work from home and actually do work. She'll be in the room, or we might have a chat at lunchtime about, what she's been doing, and I try and sort of support that. It's great. I mean, we don't work together sort of 24/7, but yeah, it's great. And if I can help her to be successful, and hopefully she will be successful, we're getting there slowly. It's all good.
Nice, lovely story, and I love the fact that you've got that shared passion and interest and goal ultimately as well. Her success will benefit both of you, really, won't it? But it's more about actually, I believe you should do this. I will help you do this, and we'll both learn along the way. She can do more author side of things, you can do more marketing side of things. My wife is similar, actually. Again, she's got an amazing idea for a new book, similar young adult dystopian thing. I don't want to give too much away. She was like, don't share this anywhere. I'll register your domain for the name that you've got, because it is quite a cool name. But again, I want to be able to help her and say, look, you can do this. Even if all you've got time for is voice memos, you can record while you're driving, and then we can get that annotated and start editing it out that way, because her time is so tight anyway as a teacher. She leaves the house at 6 a.m. with me. She gets home at 7 p.m. like me. We don't have time for these sort of side projects, it's 5 days a week. But I want to do it with her, and I'd love to have a little project I can do with her. So I like the way you found a way of doing this together and using your evenings and weekends to your advantage as well.
Yeah, and I switched over to just to make her sort of marketing efforts easier. We did have a WordPress website, and WordPress, love it or hate it, there's some foibles in terms of like updating and stuff like that. And I just wanted to be doing how it looked and the content, as opposed to doing all of the faff with PHP and plugins and finding the right plugins and making the templates work and all that business. So I just rewrote her website with Gatsby, which I know is a total developer thing to do because you end up spending all your time writing sort of React components for Gatsby. But I did that, and I think that's sort of helping to be able to put the things in place. So she didn't want like a blog and stuff. She wanted more of a content site. And it was just like putting those things in place, little bits of JavaScript, which can tell her MailChimp, her email marketing, and she can put those in place and get the right data that she needs to understand how people are sort of coming onto the site. So I do all that sort of stuff, the techie support, I guess. But yeah, I think it was one thing, just to loop back to what you said then, is it's just being aligned, isn't it? It's just believing in each other. I don't think either of us would make these sort of side projects work if we didn't believe in each other and our ability to do it. And I think it shows that she's putting in a lot of hard graft in order for it to come to fruition years later. And I think it will. I just think there's a few little key things we just need to sort out around advertising, because unfortunately that's a necessary evil nowadays, I think, within the self-published space at least anyway. But once we crack that, then I think the world's our oyster.
Absolutely. This time next year, Rodders.
I know, yeah. I can retire.
Wicked, mate. I think we have pretty much gone over our time for today. But before we move on and wrap it all up, have you got any advice or a tip for anyone who's trying to enter your sort of industry and tech, what you might have liked to have heard when you were in that position?
One thing that I've learned over the years, and sort of a big thing for me, is like consistency is key. I think you realise is that there are people that have got successful and sort of do well with whatever they do, and whether it's technology or not, is just that you have to show up. I think that people doing like if you're coming into the tech scene and you don't know anything about it, there are loads of great free resources, like Free Code Camp, Code Academy. There's loads of stuff on YouTube. So start off there, but like just show up every day, do your hour of practice, and sort of learn and fail and repeat. And I think that's the best way to do it. I know that's not like a massive, a silver bullet or whatever, or a special key that will unlock your careers. But there's loads of sort of brilliant people on like Twitter, and there's loads of sort of local meetups nowadays, things that probably weren't around when we were younger. So some of my team, they're involved with Code Bar and Code Up, which are like sort of, for helping people get into tech. And there's lots of great communities, and I know a big thing that I'm involved with at the BBC as a whole is diversity, so encouraging sort of women, minority groups, LGBTQ+, that sort of thing. I'm very heavily involved with that, and there are all these little groups of communities which will help you out. And a big thing that I wrote it in my 2019 retrospective, which I don't do and I should do, is there's a guy called Sean Wang on Twitter who moved from, he was in like financial investing. He was like an investor making like hundreds of thousands, and decided he wanted to be a developer. And now he's a really successful developer because he has this thing called Learn in Public, and it's basically like show what you're doing in public and share that with people and show your failures, and people will chime in. But I think that's really good. And I think whenever I interview people, I do a lot of interviews, it's like to show that you've done something. One of my team worked on the Pride London website, for instance, and he'd come from a non-computer science background, come from a graphic design background, and it was just like showing that the work that he'd done and being able to say, I worked on the Pride website in Gatsby and React components, blah, blah, blah. Didn't necessarily have all the experience, but just to be able to show that was really cool. And I think it's just those things, just build something and show it off and keep learning like that. Long-winded answer, sorry.
Long-winded, but lots in there, I think, to pull out. I like the idea that, one, you're reaching out to people to get advice and put your stuff out there so you can get some feedback as well. Don't be afraid to fail. That's another one you made a point of, just like try something. If it doesn't work, learn from it. Yeah. And be persistent as well. But yeah, lots of advice in that one. I'm not going to even try to summarise it.
Hopefully it's helpful. And I'm available, like what I always say to people, I've got a little pinned tweet about helping people out on Twitter. Like I literally just send me DMs or send me a message on Twitter, and I'm always willing to help people. I've got a little free JavaScript course, that testing course that I wrote, which you end up in an email autoresponder, and it sends you 7 days of emails. So we can link up that in the show notes, and that should be helpful for people just getting started.
That's brilliant, and nice way to wrap it all up, really. Because I was just going to say, how can people get hold of you and ask more questions if they're interested?
Yeah, thanks, mate. Yeah, so I am Marc with a C, Littlemore, Littlemore. So at Marc Littlemore on Twitter, and it's Marc with a C. Well, we have to say that a lot. MarcLittlemore.com is my website, and you can find some links in there. You'll find me on YouTube and stuff like that. Got a few videos around the bot space and the sort of JavaScript testing space. But yeah, Twitter's generally the best place to find me. And as much as I try and keep myself off it, I'm on it.
You're there, and you might check in every now and then as you get a healthier balance of it all.
I've taken the app off my phone, but it came back on again over Christmas. So yeah, Guilty, Your Honour.
I think I did the same, so let's not go there. Right, Mark, absolute pleasure again, as always, to talk to you. We'll definitely get you back again in the future at some point to maybe dive into some of these topics a bit more, because I think we've touched on so many areas. We could be here literally all day, just chatting non-stop, like grumpy old men. Thanks for giving up your time on a Friday, as it were, and it's been a pleasure, mate.
No problem, mate. Yeah, likewise. Thank you very much.
Thank you to everyone for listening, and especially Mark for joining me for this episode of the Make Life Work podcast. As Mark suggested, he's available as Marc Littlemore with the C on most channels, or you can visit his website, marclittlemore.com. As we also discussed, there's our On the Side community network where you can join me and Mark and others who are working on their side projects, and you can talk to us about all your stuff over there. Just go over to ontheside.network, which takes you straight into the Slack group. You can find all the details about this podcast and other episodes on sidejobling.com/makelifework, or look for Make Life Work Pod on all the socials. We're also available in the popular podcast apps, Apple, Google and Spotify, so make sure you subscribe, rate and review to let us know what you think of it. That's all from me. Join me next time when I'll be inviting along another guest to talk about balancing their work, life and side projects on the Make Life Work podcast.